Tang, you're a beautiful storyteller, and you have so many different journeys that you've been on that have taken you around the world, and have enabled you to engage with such a myriad of individuals, and you've just done such fascinating work. And really the goal for this session, and particularly for those of you who are in our new cohort, who are wherever you are in your entrepreneurship journey, we start with this session as a grounding in the journey. I think yesterday we had a gentleman who, I think he said he's 21. And Tang, I'm sure you can think back.
I'm sure I'm 20, of course.
I mean, you are 20, so you're quite young, but just to think back to where you would have been in your journey, and all of the things that were coming in front of you. And I think what Tang does so nicely is to talk about the ups and the downs and the positives, but in particular to talk about the why that he does this work. And so we're just really excited to get to spend this evening with Tang to learn. For those of you who are new to this session, for our speaker sessions, we highly encourage your engagement. So put your questions in the chat, raise your hand, get involved, have a conversation, learn as much as you can in these. As I shared, for those of you who listened earlier, my husband and I were going through Tang's LinkedIn. I was trying to figure out how to even begin to summarize who you are and what you've done. And I noticed that for every one of at least the top 3 roles here, they're all current. So I'm not quite sure how you're doing this, and I can't wait for you to tell us, being a general manager and a CEO and a president of 3 different companies, but I'm excited to hear your story. And I think to learn from where you started at Crédit Agricole CIB just a few years back, and how that journey has taken you where you are now. Tang has mentored at least one company in every cohort we've had for InnoLab, and is mentoring again for InnoLab. So really just is a jack of all trades and plays so many different roles. So with that, Tang, I can't even begin to introduce all of the amazing things you're doing, but I'd love to hand it to you to tell your story, to allow us to ask questions and learn from you. And with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emma. You are wonderful. I'm only worried that you've been using so many superlatives in your descriptions that I will find the audience will find me very boring in comparison to the expectations you've been building up. But I'll be happy to share a bit about my experience. The nice things about this conversation is that this is not a conference. Last year, Emma got me worried first about having to make a conference on a typical topics, and I started to say, all right, how will I be building it, and how many slides shall I build, etc. And then they came out with the idea, so no, just tell us about your life experience, about an entrepreneur, and about other things as well. So that's very comfortable. So thank you very much for allowing me this leisurely and this leisurely exercise of just sharing what I've been doing. The first thing I have to say is that from all evidence, Emma mentioned that you had yesterday a gentleman who was 21. So that's a big lesson of humility, because obviously in comparison, I'm a slow, very slow bloomer. And I like to say that I'm 21. Sometimes I'm rather saying that I'm 2000 years old already, because it's a more convenient way of making people smile. In reality, I turned 56 very recently, so I'm not a young startup founder anymore. Point is, if I'm saying that, and I have to share a bit my life journey, so maybe I'll introduce myself and tell you a bit what I did before being an entrepreneur, because I suppose that there is a diversity of profiles among you. Some people who are starting very early their entrepreneurial journey, some others who may have been working for very long times in other activity before turning to launching a startup after 10 years, 20 years of other activities, and that was more my profile. First of all, I was lucky to coming myself from a bit of an international background. I have a Chinese mother, a French father, and my children are speaking French, Chinese, and also Russian, because I have a Russian wife. So that's a pretty international background to start with. I hear people shouting at the door, but I think that's, I'm sorry, I need to, we were discussing with Emma the fact that we'll be certainly disturbed by the children of either one of us, but that's the case already. I'm the first, so I bet you I win this. So let me introduce first and immediately Lilia and Michel, if you see them. Right, that's done. So I hope I'll be able to close the door, Lilia, and continue. Sorry for the interruption. Lilia, tu me laisses, s'il te plaît? All right. Okay, we'll be lucky. You said it, Emma, it happened. You will be lucky if we are not interrupted again. Okay, let's stay focused. What was I saying? All right, so relatively international background, and I've been living. So you mentioned, Emma mentioned Crédit Agricole. So I made my studies in France. I spent half a year to 1 year in Scotland, and then I joined Crédit Agricole. And one of the nice things is that I joined in a French program of sending new diploma graduates abroad to support some French companies' activities at the other end of the world. So my first assignment, well, my second, because I had one in Scotland before, but my first in the financial industry was to be sent as a representative for a French bank representative office in Shanghai. And that's still relevant. Well, of course, big banking institutions is not the most entrepreneurial in principle, but there the fact of being sent at the other end of the world, from Paris to Shanghai, was already something which was quite a learning in itself. And we obtained, during the time we were in Shanghai, during the time I was in Shanghai, I spent 1.5 years at times in Shanghai, we obtained the license to open a new branch of the bank in Shanghai. This bank had a branch there 50 years ago, and it has been closed with the Chinese Revolution. And then with the reopening, it was in 1991 of China, we were one of the first foreign bank, one of the first batch of foreign bank to obtain a license to reopen. So it's like I fell in the magic potions of being faced with business buildings since my baby age, if you want. And God, I like it because everything is a new challenge. Of course, I was not running the activities. There was a general manager, a country manager, which was there to build it with me. But it started to give me a taste of what it was and what it was to start something from scratches. And starting from scratches is such a myth because you have to think big, you have to think small, you have to think strategy, you have to think about, well, but we need to buy pencil if you want those people to be able to work there, etc. So it's everything at the same time, and that's certainly what you're living there, launching your startup yourself. Except that, of course, it was in a context where it was in a big corporate, and your startupper, I will not tell you that the life of launching a business, even in a startup mode in a big corporate, is the same as being a pure startup. Because when you are in a pure startup, you have no parachute, right? It's just you're here, and anything can happen. And how we will survive through the next 2 months or 3 months, etc. But still, that was a nice experience. I did that for 1.5 years in China. We launched the bank branch operations. Then I came back to France. I had, after that, a series of 3 or 4 or 5 years in France, running through the different services into these big bank groups. When I came back to France, the bank groups kept me working with them. So that was also well, I was going to say that was also nice. That's a lie. I came back, and every time I came back from being either in a startup or at the other end of the world, building a business or bringing it back on track at the business, and came back to the. Well, I think you're hearing the barking now of the dog. That was the second thing. Do you? Sorry for that. So every time I came back from as a startup activity or an entrepreneurial-like activity, launching a business from scratches for big groups into a head office, I find it funny for 3 months. And after 6 months, I started to find it so boring. I'm sure you all experience this as well. When you come back to a big head office, you have small square boxes, and you're supposed to do something in one of those small square boxes. And it's only when you're faced with being confronted to launching something new from scratches that you find the type of pleasure and intensity that you can have. I'm not saying that working in a big head office doing your job is not a very serious job, not a very important job, but it's probably a matter of psychology. Some of us in the world are made to work into a frame and structures environment. When I happened to be, well, I'm going to do something to this dog. Okay, let me just 1 minute, half a second.
No worries. I would invite my dog to bark as well, but he's decided to take a nap on the bed.
Sorry.
And
so I
may or may not be an unmovable dog. Don't worry, Tang. My dog barks in pretty much every entrepreneurship session.
Yes.
To the point where I have to mute, put on my, turn off the video, chase the dog down, and hope that nobody noticed I stopped leading the session. So, don't worry, it's fine.
So I promise you, I didn't throw him through the window. I just opened the door so that he can go bark at someone else in the family. So yes, I suppose that in the floor that we have today, a lot of us is in the category of people who need to confront themselves to build something from scratches, to be challenged by the opportunity and the uncertainty at the same time, and not being only in the framework of something which is protected, which allow very good professional expertise. This has really quality in terms of building organizations addressing a certain number of issues. But when you're when you have the fiber to build something from scratch, the fiber for entrepreneurship, when you go back into this kind of environments, you survive for a while, and then it's a little bit like you're a plant with no sunshine on the water, and you start to cripple. So you have to go back and find something else you can run after and feel like you're really breathing. So I did that for a few years. During during those years, I came back to a French head office, etc. I was a bit relentless. I kind of changed the activity and make quite a scandal in the organizations, because every year I wanted to change and go to another service. So at least I have something new to experiment. I think I got myself to the points where I was on the verge of being either put into a locker or being thrown out, when luckily for me, the guy who was a country manager at the time we opened the branch in Shanghai came back to me and say, oh, talk. Now we've reached a point where we really need to have a head of credit for the activity in China to cover our risk, because there are several branches in different places of the country. We also cover things from Hong Kong, etc. We need now to build up, and because I've been doing different things in the credit department, in the credit risk department, in the head office, I was a kind of a good profile, plus this affinity with. So I was extracted by by these guys. His name was Philippe Coquelou. He was not French, he was German, but working for a French bank, and he brought me back a second time, and then that was pleasure again. Smaller entity, growing fast, a real responsibility, and so on. So, and this is the type of cycle I've been experiencing. Maybe some of you have been working a few years in insurance group before what you are doing today, or maybe you've been going already on and back, forward and backward on that, and have already experienced this. But we probably have to come to the reality. That's who we are. It's very interesting to come back to the initial environments, but at the risk of finding it quite boring. And we are probably, most of us, made for this kind of expertise. So we need to be able to find this kind of context and challenge to be able to develop, to bloom, and to be the full of what we can be. We may succeed, we may fail. The journey to entrepreneurship is never an easy one, but maybe we just don't have much choice neither. So let's enjoy trying to do what we're made for. So extracted, I spent 5 years in China, did a few things, broke a few doors, a few windows, a few glass on the way, made a few great friends, made a few great enemies as well, etc. And then I came back. I have to mention, I'll come to the purely entrepreneurial part of my activity later, but I have to mention that I stopped working in the financial service industries after going to China, coming back to France. Spent 1 year. The same thing struck me again. I became rapidly tired of being working in this organization. After 1 year, I asked for a sabbatical. and stopped working in a bank to start writing a novel. So that was quite a change. And I did wrote a novel during this year. This was never published, but I wrote other novels later, and some of them were published. So that's another part. That's my secret life, if you want, and that's one of the things that I love doing, which I'm passionate about. A disclaimer, however, I never found it generating enough revenues to be able to pay the rent and and the roof over my family. So that's a long-term patience. It will never leave me completely, but the reality is that the financial industry is paying better, except for very few cases which are extremely popular writers. And I'm not even sure that the most popular are writing what I like the most. So I probably have no options, and I have to continue to have a focus on finance as well as an entrepreneurship on finance. So as you see, I could do a lot of things, but in reality, my options are relatively limited. Either on one side, by the fact that I get bored rapidly, doing when I'm not doing what something which is motivating me, or that I cannot generate enough revenues by selling the books to be able to feed my family. So my real path is relatively narrow. My expectations, my temptation are very wide, but my path is reasonably narrow. What happened next? Okay, I stopped for 1 year. I wrote a book. I started to realize that okay, I need to find an alternative job. I tried to do something else. I tried to work as to support a French Senate, a French congressman, also a senator. It's a senate. The second chamber is a senate in France, and I did this for a little while, not very long. Neither. My point was, all right, serving the state, the public, the community, that's some things, defending the interests of the police in sense of the country, sounds very nice. I had 6 months of it, and I say, all right, I've opened this window to look at what is inside, and then it's the time to close it and to go to something else. I'm sure that you have some case of people who are very engaged, very passionate, very pure, or practical enough to mitigate keeping their ambitions while accepting us, but it just didn't work for me. So I tried something else again. I tried, I was asked by some friends to take over the management of a small publishing house. It was a pretty small micro publishing house, which was created by people who were passionate about history, geography, etc. And they have founded 7, 8 of them together, but 2 of them mostly, a publishing house which was specialized in republishing books about the mostly old books telling story of traveling around the world, discovering new continents, etc. Quite nice topic, right? So, and the fact is, the reason why they asked me to do that is because it was founded by, I mentioned, by 8 persons, but there were only 2 persons really working directly on that. And those 2 persons were husband and wife. And they got divorced. And when people get divorced, maybe sometimes it's very needed for them, but they tend to fight about everything, as they tend to fight sometimes, unfortunately, about their children. Not everyone. This can happen in better context. Tell you the truth, I've tested both bad divorce and good separation. So both are possible, but in this case, that was a bad divorce. And they had no children. So they had to fight about something else. So they fought about the publishing houses they had created. And at some point, well, the teams came to call me and said, all right, you have to take us out of that. Can you please run this small publishing house for a while so that this is not completely destroyed by the conflict between the two principal founders before. So I accepted to do it, and I carried it for 6 to 9 months after the situation was pacified enough so that I can give back the command to one of the two initial founders. Right, and then truth is, okay, a writing book don't feed you so much. Working for to support a politician, except if you are in the state of mind which allow you to get some big backshish at some point or the other, but otherwise it doesn't feed you or doesn't feed your family very well neither. And a big publishing house probably feed your family, but a small one does not feed your family neither. So at that point, I said, all right, then I need to do something. And I went back to banking at that stage. So I went back to banking. I went back first to the same bank I left before, but of course, coming back after having left some people, they take you back because they felt compelled to do so. But the opportunity, bit of sound. The opportunity is not necessarily the same one or the same trends that you had a few years before, right? And that's maybe a reality. It's a reality I hope you will not be faced with, but that's happened sometime. So I spent a couple of years, 1.5 years in this bank, and I let myself being invited by another banking group to do something else. So that was. Emma, how long do I have?
Well,
I just want not to control a bit the times. How long can you give me?
You have from 5 to 7 p.m. GMT. So that gives you an hour and a half.
All right. Minus sometimes for question, discussion, etc. So I still have some times. If you feel that I shall accelerate at some point, tell me.
What I do want you to do is give us the link to your book. And I really hope it's on Kindle. So that's like one of those. I'll follow up on email, but I would absolutely love to see what you wrote.
All right. Thank you very much. Truth is, maybe one of my issues with books is that I don't appear to be a lucky charm for the publisher, or depends how you look at it. My last, so I've published 3 or 4 books. It's 3 or 4 because one of them was more contributions to a geopolitical books. The other were novels, but maybe still 4 with books of novel. But the last 2 I published, I found a publisher who was great, who was publishing at the same times with digital book and physical and paper books. So that was quite nice and would allow to do it. But it was a small publishing house, which was led by 2 persons. See again, they were not married. It looked like it was on the safe side, right? But then it was not funny at all because one of them got a kind of sickness, which after publishing my first book, Tang got a sickness, and I don't know how to call it in English. I don't remember the name in English, but it's the same. You remember this astrophysicist, which was on a wheelchair, being able to speak only through some machines and able to move only his eyelids or something like this. Very famous one. This was the same sickness, yes. And this astrophysicist is a rare case because he has been living for decades with this and still able to continue his research and his sharing, even if it was like a mummy in physical terms, still able to communicate. So that was great. But in most of the case, the decay is much more rapid, and you lose further control of your. Sorry, this turned into a sad story, but you lose the control of your finger first, and of your arms, and then of all your body until the time it's the respirations, which is shit. And started, of course, she moved a bit away from her main activity, and then she went from Paris to Belgium, where assisted suicide was authorized. And then she was also carrying this cause of allowing people to have assisted suicide because she didn't want to live like this. So, all right, one of the two publisher lost. I really grieve her because she was really a great person and a great publisher, and having a real sense for the same type of literature I love. But we still had the second one, so the publishing house was still there. He was a bit overwhelmed also, but he published the second book, which was already in the second book they published. So this one was published, and to some extent I had the hope that it brought rather good luck to the publisher, because thanks to it, he was able to get a literary prize. We were able to get a literary prize in France, and that's allowed him to have a bit of publicity, and that was good. Well, it's meaningless, but still is good in terms of promotion. So that was rather good. But 1 year after that, he died from a heart attack. So the two founders of this house died, and the truth is that this more publishing house behind also fell. So sorry, that was a sad story. I was not intending to tell it today, but you asked me to send you the link on Kindle. I still have some paper version of this book. So if you send me an address, I'll be happy to send a copy of the book to you. But the online version has been disappearing with the collapse and the closures of this publishing house, which lost its two founder. So I also need now, other than working in the different Insurtech sectors, to find a new publisher to be able to republish some of those who have disappeared and publish the next one also. All right. That was what we call in French an aparté, getting a little bit out of the subject. And let's go back to it. Yes. So, new banking group. It was BPCE, Banque Populaire Caisse d'Épargne, as a big French, one of the France has a lot of big French banking groups. That's another one of them. But these big French banking groups was also in the habit of buying very small banks on islands around the world, overseas territories of France or not. And they bought one, small one, in a small archipelago, which is called Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon, large of Newfoundland, Canada, in the North Atlantic. And when big groups buy small entity at the other end of the world, usually after a couple of years, they start to have doubt about what's happening there and what they have done. So they recruited me, asking me, as one of the directors of the banks, and especially with a focus on credits, to go there and to try to bring things together, to put things in order. Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon, that's not the weather you have in Ghana, nor in Kenya. It's large of Newfoundland, Labrador. This is a very nice environment. It's a lot of rocks. If you like the sea and the rocks, it's very beautiful. But it's also a place where you can do some selling, but you can do it only 6 months in the year because the other 6 months, the port is frozen. So you're living half of the times in ice, a lot of snow, a lot of cold. In the past, when you had boats which were coming from Europe to fish in the waters around that, which were quite rich in terms of cods in particular, and come to stop, you may have 1 meter of ice around the boat that need to be broken with a pick. So a very different experience from what I did in China or from what you can have in Ghana and Kenya. And well, that was quite an experience for lovers of English literature. You may know about the books The Wuthering Heights, so from Emily Bronte. So when I was told about this opportunity, for me, my kind of literary mind was triggered. I said, all right, that's an environment which is so tough, with snow, with cold, with wind, etc., that this should be inspiring in a way or the other. And other than putting a bank back in order, I will also be able to write a new book. So I went there. I'm not sure there was so many competition for the position because not so many people were having a taste for this kind of experiment, but I once there was been very happy of doing this. So I want to spend 1.5 years, 2 years in this bank, which was called Banque des Îles, the islandish banks, to put things back in order. The bank had some affiliate in different other places going in place. So it's allowed me to travel also in place from going from the Bermuda to Saint Martin in the Caribbean. And let's say that the inspection missions, the audit missions in the branch were offering quite a contrast, of course. So that was nice. Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon was nice if you like to sit on the rocks, to listen at the horns, and look at the sea and the wind, etc. And I like this fortress, so I enjoy. But guess what? I went there with my companion, at that stage, my wife, and we arrived there. And after 1.5 years, she started telling me, Tang, I'm very happy to have been coming here with you, and that's very nice. But maybe 1.5 years is enough as a kind of experience in this environment. And maybe it's time to think about something else. I find myself having to choose between leaving my banking job or having my wife leaving me. And I made what I think is the right choice. So I left this Banque des Îles at that stage. And then I had another quite interesting, I think it's kind of the last purely employee positions I had, but it was interesting because it was building into new environment again. And I was hired by not a big French banking group, rather a small but dynamic French bank who had in the past 7 years moved from being in 1 country to 7 countries, so growing quite rapidly. But their next challenge was to launch in China. And they were trying for 3 years to find how to launch in China, but didn't find the model to go there. And at that point, well, they were trying to find someone who had also some experience in this environment, being experienced in French. They wanted everything at the same time. So of course, like every recruiter, so someone who can be French, who can be a good boy with sharing their cultures, and someone who has an experience of totally different cultures and being able to build things from scratches. And they ended up thinking that I may be the candidate. So I went again, 1 more times to China with the missions to build something from scratch for them. When I arrived, there were 2 of us in the representative office. And 8 years later, there were 100 persons working on my payroll, but 800 people working for the project all around China. and we've been launching in a row. First credit card, then prepaid card, then payment terminal. Well, prepaid card were big numbers. We issued up to 30 million prepaid card a year. So that's China. A lot of people, big number. If I have to do the same in Luxembourg, that would be pretty challenging. But in China, you don't have the same. The same. You can play with different scale of number. So payment terminal, 20,000 payment terminals through the country. Then we started to move a bit to, of course, with all this, we did also some insurance cross sales. That's kind of typical, you know, those people, those bankers, when they have customers, they want to make them more profitable, so they try to sell insurance to them as well. So that's also one of the way I became from a banker, started to become an insurer as well. I've been considering whether we could bring models to launch an insurance activity also in China. We didn't do it, but we studied it. Discussed a lot also and partners also with the likes of Alibaba groups, Alipay and financial and WeChat Pay, which sure some of you have at least have heard about. So very extremely large payment ecosystem in China, reaching between 800,000 to 1 billion users if you extend it to their presence in other Southeast Asian countries. So huge player, but our strategy with payment terminal and controlling the payment network was such that to be able to penetrate the acceptance network of card we had with their mobiles to physical, to the online to offline payments with the QR code, they also had to partner with us because we're holding the payment terminal in every store, and to be able to pay with the mobile payments in store, they need that. So it was a bit like, thing to say a highway. I don't know. You may not have in Africa the same concept, that you build a big highway for cars, and then you put a payment tools on it, and everyone who's taking the highway have to be able to share to pay you something to go through it. So as we had a payment terminal in all those stores in all of China, actors like Alipay and WeChat Pay, despite the extreme powerful strengths of their groups, had to negotiate with us and to negotiate with us for a very small share of the payment volumes to be able to provide this. So that was 8 years of activity in China. That was quite funny, because especially it's funny when you're doing at the other world to do something. It is at the beginning, it's more. Nobody even believes that you can do it. So at the beginning, you have great independence, and you can build a lot of things. A bit of loss is tolerated, etc. And then you scale it. And the more you scale it, the more people in the head office are interested by that. So the more people you have looking over your shoulders and wanting to do that. So but still it was fun, because like in Africa, the growth rate in China is pretty rapid, and we had the opportunity to launch a new product or a new model every 2 or 3 years. The concept was you launch something new under new business models, and you can have for the first 2 or 3 years, because it's new and you kind of do something that nobody else has been doing. If you think it well, you can have rate of growth of between 50% to 100% every year for 2 or 3 years. And then the rest of the market is copying you. So it continues to grow because you're in a fast growth market, but then you grow at 20, 30% growth per year. Still looks very good, right? But it looks very good from the head office point of view. But you also know that you have the potentials to do more in China, and that, in fact, if you continue to grow at 20, 30%, the crowd is catching up on you. So you launch a new models, new products, and you launch it. So that was quite exciting 8 years. However, I gave the role of CEO of this to another member of the group. I stayed in the board for 1 more years as member of the board of directors, the supervisory board, member of the supervisory board, to be able to provide some advice. I spent 1 year doing a bit of strategic business development for the groups in other countries in Asia. The logic was, all right, the first things we succeeded in Asia was in China with this guy. Let's try to have him launch in other countries like in India, Taiwan, Vietnam. Let's see what can be done. But the truth is, at that point, I told you I'm a slow bloomer, right? So at that point, I just came to the fact that no, I have to stop doing this kind of thing for other people, even if it was very interesting. I had to try it myself and to move to launch some things as a real startup, being totally independent, and where I'd be creating a model from scratches. As you see, it took me a lot of times, maybe much longer than you, to take the decisions and to make the jump. So in all humility, probably a lot of you are more gifted and faster than me at going there. But see, then what happened? The first thing I've been looking at was, I did a lot of creative activity, was thinking, all right, this peer-to-peer lending model, which is developed in UK with Zopa. In UK was one of the precursors. In America, with a few great actors developing fast, a bit slower on continental Europe. That model was really interesting, and I was already looking at it a bit for this this previous employer or a bank, thinking, well, maybe that's something we can try to develop in China. But when I left them, thinking, okay, is it what I shall do? And it was very interesting, but the limit to it is, by the times I was ready to leave on a bank, there were more than 2,000 platforms in China doing it. China had become by far the biggest market for peer-to-peer lending in all the world. There were 4 more volumes of peer-to-peer lending in China compared to America, which itself was probably as big as the rest of the world combined. And I just thought, all right, if I will be launching the platform 2001 in this market, no, that's not what I want to do. I wanted to be on something which is more new, more creative, more innovative. I'm not saying that that's always what you shall do. Sometimes when something is really working, being the number X to do it and to join a trend which is working and working fast may still be a good idea and may still be a good opportunity for entrepreneurial business. So I'm not saying don't do that, but well, if maybe you want something else and you want to be developing your own trail and your new models to try to put to make a difference. So that's what I was trying to look. And at the end of the day, okay, this model is working in a certain way in banking to do lending. Is there another way to apply the same logics to insurance? And the truth is, insurance is still a very different business model, so you cannot apply it the same. But the inspirations of, instead of having a central actor who is the banker or the insurers and customer all around him, can you build a model where everyone is as a lending to the other, or everyone is covering the risk of each other? So that's the ideas I tried to crack and to launch a model which was which I called in Western terms a peer-to-peer insurance model, a bit abusively. We will see why later. And that China lately has been rather speaking of as a mutual aid model. So by the end of 2014, I left my previous employers. I launched this model. I start speaking at it. I start building platforms to be able to roll it. I start incorporating one company in Hong Kong as a holding because no international investors want to put money into a company which is in China, and there is a exchange control, so it's more complicated. A second company based in Shanghai to be able to run operationally the activity, and then just launch. So that was nice. There is a short story, and maybe the long story if you have a lot of questions, I want to get into the detail of this entrepreneurial experience. And maybe that's interesting also because that's what you are going to do. I start by the short story. I did it during 2.5 years, scaled several different versions of the products, brought 50,000 users to this Insurtech platform, and then I sold the control of the company to a Chinese financial platform. I sold the control of it not because it was the right time to sell it, making a huge profit. I sold it because it was the times where to continue to develop and to scale it, I will need to invest much more. And B2C model, it was mostly a B2C model. So B2C model requires more investment to scale and to grow it than B2B models where you often generate your revenue as you run. And it seemed to me at that point to be a good approach. And I already had one of the investors, minority investors in my capital tables, who was a Chinese financial company which was interested in the concept, and then I sold it. So that's short story version 1. Then you have long story version 2 and long story version 3. The version 2 of the story is how this journey was not a bed of roses and was great, but still very tough at some point of the times. The version 3 of the story is, if I look at it from a distance, a few years after, and see what happened after me at the same time in that specific market, and what it brought to me, even if I sold it, not at it sold it to recoup my investments and a little bit more, but not becoming a multi-billionaire. But still, it brought me really a lot, and there is not any way I can regret this experience. And the 3 years I've been investing into building this, it's been tough, but it has been at the same time such a learning experience and very rewarding in terms of self-development in many ways. So, which one? All right, let's start by the nice one, right? The story number 3, the long-term visions of what it brought to the market and to China. The first thing is what it brought to the market. When I did it in China, I was one of the 2 actors which were developing a little bit similar models. And I developed it under the name of Tang. So of course you understand it. It's Chinese, and it means something like protecting each other between friends. Something like this. Yeah, Emma, it's light on your side. So this friend. What I can see with 3 years, 4 years on the road, that it inspired a lot of people, because when I started, there was 2 of us in the Chinese market. When I left China, there were 12 or 13 actors in the Chinese market with this model. So it inspired a lot of people. And this number of 12 actors increased to more than 20 by 2020, and it developed into markets which reached 300 million users in China being protected through this mutual aid peer-to-peer insurance type of model. So the reality is that it's really delivered a purpose, and it was really an extremely powerful tool to protect especially the people who were underinsured in China. The path is developed the most is to cover the people who did not have a good health and medical coverage, and that can be something which can be very relevant into an African continent context as well. I hear that the percentage of people benefiting from a health insurance coverage in Africa is very limited. And depending on the country, I hear about 1%, 2%, 3%. In any case, that means that you have 97% of the populations who do not have a good cover, or who have to some extent some mutual coverage through family, or maybe through extended family. So that's not, it doesn't mean, of course, the challenge needs to be met in another way, but with also that's generating a big vulnerability. So that's an interesting model, I think, for the African continent. I'll come back to why. The second thing which is interesting is that you have, well, one of the questions that many people in Europe, for example, are wondering, I have been wondering about the peer-to-peer insurance model is, can it scale? It's a fascinating idea, a lot of very interesting considerations in terms of fairness, etc. But can it scale? And the truth is, if you go back to France and you think about how can I leverage it in France, and you want to stay on the same market, which is helping for health protection, in France, okay, let's tell you, in France, first, everyone working benefit from the social security, meaning that it will cover roughly 70% of all your medical expenses. That's a state-sponsored program. Then the regulations demand on every employer to buy a mutual insurance, an additional private health coverage to cover the initial expenses on top of those 70%. So if you work in a company, your employer have to provide this to you, and then you're on a lot of major expenses, you'll get some close to 100% coverage. Then a few things which are considered as being more comfort than vital and survival will have a lower coverage, but still. Then, of course, you can, what happens if you don't have a job? First, if you don't have a job, but you're married with someone who has one, then you'll be covered by his social security and his additional mutual insurance. But if you don't have a job and you're just alone, you have the right to something called in France, la CMU. It means universal medical coverage. The logic in France is that everyone should be entitled to medical coverage. So even if you don't have an employer to do that to you, you can still apply to it and you'll still have this coverage. Then the next point is, I'm not saying it to encourage immigrations to France, but the reality is that even if you are an illegal migrant in France, you still have the right to this state-sponsored universal medical coverage, because there is a part which is the big ideas about diversity, but the other part is more medical funded. It's like, all right, if you want to maintain a good health in the populations in a general, you should not leave people being exposed to develop epidemic contaminations, etc. Because if it's moved through one community, it will just expand to the other. So it's the best things for the overall population health is to cover to everyone. So once I have said this, the fact is that to find the underprotected population, to be able to provide a peer-to-peer model to them to resolve their issue, you have really to scratch your head to think about who you can cover. I'm not saying there is not use case, but they are probably not in the medical cover field, and they have to be found in much more narrow niche. But if you turn to, when you were turning to China, you had probably 30% of the population which were living in the big cities, working for state-owned company or working for international companies, being covered medically, and then you have the other 70% living in the rural areas or working as a private entrepreneur who had no coverage at all. So you had a big uncovered population, which was one of the initial elements. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's a story which is worth to tell in China with the situation of largely uncovered populations. And a second asset, which was a very popular usage of mobile payments through Alipay and WeChat Pay, this model was able to reach 300 million people, out of 1.5 billion, but then it still means something which is close to 20% of the population. 20% of the population being mostly the uncovered populations. So if you cover the 20% coverage compared to the health insurance penetrations in most African countries, you really have something which could have still a tremendous impact on the community, I suppose. And nobody says that 20% is the maximum you could reach. So that's the long view on this, and that's one of the reasons I may regret that I did not stay longer to continue to develop it. But and then I'll tell you why I think a few reasons why I didn't go faster into doing it. But still, it's still an element of pride to things that I've been contributing to develop and promote models which can have a tremendous impact on in terms of social good, in terms of covering the need of population. So that was story number the story number 3 before story number 2 on this aspect. If I look a bit more on the details of where it was successful in the terms that 15,000 users approved, that you have tractions, been able to attract a few investors, being able to sell it to a majority investor at some point. And I also had some personal reasons to want to go back to France after 10 years in China from family and others. But one of the interesting things is also to think what could have been done before. And I think that I've been making one mistake, which I'm sharing now when I'm running a masterclass about entrepreneurship or to my clients when I'm building products to them. And this mistake was I've been targeting a niche of a niche. So niche of a niche is the way I'm saying it now, but in fact, no. The way I did it is I tried to launch a double level of innovation. And the double level of innovation was level of innovations 1 is invent a peer-to-peer model. So the peer-to-peer model was very interesting because you can say to people, all right, you protect each other, and then it's a model which can give you back the excess if you have an excess of the premiums over the risk, and it gives you back also power of decision and information. So it was something which was quite nice. Give everything back to the member at every level, give power of decisions, give information, and give the access back to that. So that was a very nice concept. And it's allowed to reach more people. But on top of these conceptual innovations, which was very interesting, I also told myself, all right, shall I push insurance products which are in themselves very innovative? And shall I try to address type of risk which are not covered today? And I had this as a part of my view, which was, all right, let's cover social and societal risk that people don't address. So I did a few strange type of insurance. The first one I launched was, if you look in many environments, if you speak about over-indebtedness, so people who cannot repay their debt anymore, it happens very often, at least in the market I've been operating, and I'm coming from banking and credit, so I was quite sensitive to that. The first risk is losing your job, but the second one is divorcing. You hear me speaking about divorce a lot. I'm certainly not promoting divorce, but it has an impact on publishing companies that are created. It has an impact potentially on the children. That it has an impact on the financial health of a couple as well. Because when you divorce, first you need to rent to different places instead of one. You waste money sometimes paying lawyers to litigate against each other. Well, if you are able to do it amicably, it will be so much better, etc. But the result is that a lot of people which are failing financially are a result of the separation. So the idea was, can we, through this model, provide a coverage against the financial risk of getting divorced? So that if someone is entering this community, and if 5 years later here the person has to divorce, it will have, it's not the logic of okay, I'm going to court and I'm claiming half of the fortune of Jeff Bezos, so that and litigate for millions or tens of millions. The logic was just how can I ensure that on a temporary basis the person can continue to support its daily life expenses, even if it's falling into a very different condition. So it was more a logic of, you have the right to a monthly forfeit, a monthly payment, depending on how much you've contributed to the community, which will allow you for 1 year or 2 years to rebuild your rebuild your footing, rebuild your economic basis, etc. So it was pretty nice, but just one second. I have Mr. Michel, 7 years old, who is asking something from me. Just a small second. Okay. Tu fermes la porte, s'il te plaît. All right. And another one I launched was to protect migrant workers coming from the rural area of China to the big cities. And the third one I tried to launch was to address a very important issue in China, which was children's kidnapping, children's missing. And there is in China, like in some other countries, quite often children being kidnapped, and it can be for different reasons, going to illegal adoptions, illegal work of minors, a lot of silly, evil reasons. But that's something which is quite traumatic, of course, for whoever it happens to. You had those stories about parents which, for years and years and decades, were looking for the disappeared children, running around all of China, all the time they have available and never finding it. And when you kidnap a child who is very young, 15 years after, he has no even a memory about who their real parents were or where he was living before. So it's a real tragedy, and that's another tragedy that we try to address. So I was very focused on things which are very much social and societal evil, and finding a way to support financially. Support financially in the case of missing children is not I buy a new child, right? That cannot be that. The matter is just that when there is a kidnapping, what is said usually, if you want to have a chance to recover the person, you really need to have someone on the train extremely fast during the first 48 hours. If you don't do it within the first 48 hours, the chance of ever recovering the child is falling immediately by 50%, and then every week it's falling again. So the only chance is to be able to have people working immediately on this. And the police is doing its job, of course, but the police sometimes also have some hesitations about mobilizing a full teams when the children just stay with his grandmother overnight or these kind of things. And anyway, if you're a parent and you're in these situations, it's kind of the police do what they want, but they will never be good enough. Nothing will be good enough as long as your children is not back. So the idea is how to be able to finance the private investigations to be as fast as possible to try to help increase the chance of doing it, even if ultimately it's always the police who will be intervening. So that's how a financial collaborative, crowd-funded solutions could be brought to this. Nice ideas. There are big social subjects. But as I was saying, this was innovations on top of an innovation. While if I had approached the topic of directly the subject of value ones, the health insurance in an underserved market, maybe because everyone is already aware of this need, and it's not something so innovative. Maybe in the 2.5 years, I will have done not 15,000 users, but 500,000 members, and this will have been another story in terms of scale, raising more funds to continue to scale, etc. So maybe that's one specific case. There is in entrepreneurship, nobody has the answer to your solution, but people with experience can have some experience that they can share with you, and you can leverage on this experience to take a decision. But you don't have teacher, you have people sharing experience, and the decision belongs to you. I see that someone is raising his hand, so if there is there an immediate question?
Yeah, Dorian, do you want to unmute and join us?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tang. That was a very interesting story so far, and a lot of things I think we can learn from it. One thing I was wondering is you mentioned that you were one of two with this idea, one of the first two in China. And so I was wondering how that worked with regulation. Was there already regulation for this? And I think that applies to maybe many of us that are trying to do something that is so innovative that maybe there is no regulation yet. And sometimes it's difficult to see how you can fit in and what our approach should be to that, if we should be worried about it in the first place. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yes, very valid questions indeed, Dorian. And so the first very direct answer, there was no regulation on that. That's the first point. Except that when you are in a legal environment, you always have regulations. You may have regulation, not have regulations exactly on that, but you have a certain number of other regulations, and you can still things around what exists already to try to get a sense of what should be right and what should be just straight wrong and straight against the regulations when there is none. Different regulators in different markets have a different approach to regulation. I've not, and I'd be interested if there is a testimony there, have a full knowledge about how the Ghana National Insurance Commission is running the issues of innovative model. I see that there is Elias is here from Kenya and from the Insurance Regulatory Authority of Kenya, and I see how they have operating as well. in a very interesting model. What I found interesting in some of the African regulators I've met is that they have sometimes a real feeling that a part of their role is to promote the development of innovation. And I know that that's the case for Elias, and I would assume that in Ghana, seeing that first I've been to Ghana already, and I had the occasion to speak with some of the regulators, but the model of bringing the model of this accelerator lab promoted by the regulators to Ghana is also kind of a testimony to the fact that there is this desire. After that, I see that Newton asked a question as well, but I may, sorry if I'm too long in the answer, but I continue to develop, except if that's exactly in the topic you want to address, Newton. The second thing about it is that the way it's organized is different. You have this concept of sandbox, which is promoted by certain regulators. And there against the feedback from our Ghanaian regulator would be interesting there. In Kenya, for the ERA, they have established a sandbox. It's been done in the UK, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in many other markets. And that's a kind of way of framing it to be able to tell to the startup, we provide you this environment, and within this framework, you can innovate if we allow you into the sandbox type of models, just under the conditions that you should give us some transparency about what you are doing. So that's something I feel is a good model for the development, because it provides a kind of hybrid solutions of visibility for both actors, for the regulator and for the Insurtech. It's not a perfect safety for the Insurtech startup founder, because the sandbox may still result at the end of the day by the regulator saying, okay, we see what's happening, and no, we cannot condone it on the to be scaled. So you have no certainty, but at least you have a privileged discussion that you can have to know more to experiment about it. Then coming back to, so you have three types of regulator. The one who don't want sandbox and say, all right, the same rules should apply to everyone. So if you're a startup or a big bank, will regulate you into the same model. It's maybe tough and a bit, and sometimes have a negative impact on the innovations. But some of the regulators do that. You have the regulator, the sandbox export regulator, which is trying to provide a kind of form of best of both worlds. The Chinese regulator traditionally operated into different ways. There is a lot of gray area. Don't do into the black area where I have said it's no. You can do everything in the white area. And in the gray area, well, we won't say. We'll see what happens. And then at the time convenient for us, we will take a decision. So it's at the same time very enabling in terms of you can launch things in this gray perimeter, but at the same time there is a risk of a crackdown one day when the regulators say, okay, we've seen this, you've developed an industry, a huge industry with million or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of users, and then we may decide at some point that we want to have a crackdown on this because we are not satisfied about the result. So that's the Chinese market, at the same time enabling, and the same time keeping a risk over your head. And I saw the Chinese regulator playing differently around that. In some of the models, I told you that I developed prepaid cards in China, and that was initially a gray area. But the way they handle it is, there was a gray area, it grew very big, and then they started to think, okay, we need to find a way to regulate it. They published a draft regulation, let it be known to every member of the industry, get different feedback, then the next year publishing a second version of a draft regulation, taking into account some of the feedback. And then at the end of the third year, they publish a third version of the draft regulation, which becomes the real regulation. And of course, the regulation at the end still satisfied some people, did not satisfy some others, but it was looking like the approach of the regulator was, I let something develop, then I put the regulations. This regulation is inspired by the best practice in the market in terms of having a fair and transparent approach. So the regulations will cast aside kind of the bad players, those ones who went on the abuse or did not build viable models on the long term, but will be quite rewarding for the good players because I will continue to be able to develop with maybe a bit more requirements into reserve, etc., or capital, etc. But I will be able to develop, and as the bad one will be excluded, that's very good for the virtuous one will benefit from a hurdle to help them to develop. Looks good. But that was for the cycle on the prepaid card. Charles says that on the cycle with the peer-to-peer lending, they let it develop at the biggest peer-to-peer lending in all the world by far, really addressing some underserved sectors for small enterprise, for example. And then the crackdown came and was quite restrictive until the point that this industry kind of disappeared. Counterparties, so some of them, it was, you had 3,000 players and 2,000, then 600, and everyone was believing first that the last 600 players will be the one who will be allowed to continue to play, but they continues to push down. So for the peer-to-peer lending activity, the result was a few players were able to obtain some consumer finance license. The status of consumer finance came. So switch to different regulatory models and continue their activity. But the initial model of peer-to-peer lending kind of disappeared. For peer-to-peer insurance, they let it to develop a lot from mutual aid. So not insurance, mutual. At some point, the regulator came, and I was still developing them. And the only thing that the regulator came to tell us was, not shall stop this. They told us, this model is a mutual protection model, fair enough. It's not an insurance, you're telling it that to us, fair enough. So, okay, you don't need insurance license to do it. We don't need to have the same level of reserve, but you cannot use the word insurance. And you should put a disclaimer clearly on your website. What we are doing is not insurance, it's something which is different. And during several more years, during three or four more years, this allowed the industry to scale to these 300 million underserved people being covered. I shall say that that's something which is switching today. You may have heard that in the last year, the main actors and the 200 million of them were covered by two actors, one which was backed by Alibaba and financial groups, and the other by the WeChat Tencent group. And there has been last year kind of crackdown on the big tech themselves. So they started not to have an issue with the model in particular, but a model about reducing the scope and the capacity of the big tech and trying to split what they do. No, you cannot do everything at the same time. You have to split it into independent models. And this is leading to a scaling down of this model in China. What I feel here is that it was not, in this case, continue maybe to peer-to-peer lending. Peer-to-peer lending, probably with the 3,000 players, there has been a lot of abuse, which was justifying for the scaling down. But on the peer-to-peer insurance, in fact, it's a political crackdowns on the big tech industry, which are very big on various things and were becoming really dominant into the market. And that's the kind of side victim of this crackdown. So I don't know what will be the final point for SAP, to which point it will be going. But that's an illustration of the risk you have in innovative models which are outside of the regulator. In this Chinese-like model, even if the regulator did, and they told to me, just, okay, put the disclaimer on your website, you're not insurance, and they didn't ask to insure, and they let it grow to 300 million users. And then you have this political context to make this scaling down. So sorry, one question, very long answer. In fact, I have not answered yet to the initial question about Emma. How come you have so many roles at the same time on your LinkedIn CV? But I'll keep that for the end. And Newton has been waiting for very long. Apologies, Newton, but I'll be glad to take the question if you can now. Newton, you're on mute. Newton?
Yes, you're on mute. Yes, I just did. Can you hear me? Yeah, so I have a couple of questions. I think about four questions for you.
Four.
And the first, it's about. Yes, the first is about what techniques actually did you use to consolidate that point where you were actually running your startup and you were not working permanently? What techniques, what financial techniques do you use to survive? Because nowadays we always travel. Yeah. So what techniques can you use? Can you please share?
Quite good question. The ratio, of course,
probably might help us.
Only about what did I do at that times, but how to handle it in general. And you know, there is different approaches. There is bootstrapping with a paycheck without leaving your company. I was a bit more radical in my side. I just took the opportunity of a visit by my group CEO coming here, etc. And I told him to his face, well, I want to stop. I want to create a startup in this. He didn't appreciate the story at all. I thought that would be a basis to have them as my investor. Sympathetically come, but that's not how it works. So I had one strength and one weakness. My strength is I had been working for a number of years in the role before in the banking industry, could be the insurance industry as well, and being able to have a bit of saving. So this bit of saving has been used in part to finance the initial investments in building the initial platforms. It's only after that I could have some external investors contribute to fund it. And it has been also to support my daily expense for some period. So that was the strength. I had a chance of not starting, of having pockets that I could empty. Not that it's always a good idea to empty your pocket at the beginning, but that was possible for me. My weakness is that I had already a family, lot of kids to support, etc. So my monthly budget, my cash burn, personally, was not neglectable. So I had to be careful about this. But I was able to start telling me that, okay, I'm able to support myself and the project for the first 12 months, which is what I did. And I was modestly lucky, but in being able to find some small-scale seed investment as it went. I think that the first one I had, the second investor after myself, was an accelerator fund supported by SOSV, which is a big American seed investment fund, and which has a model of building accelerator in different ways and being allowed to finance a bit the startup it accepts in the accelerator. It's not every accelerator working in this model, but that's what this model. So it was a bit of both. Then, to be frank, I came at a point, some point where this money was starting to be exhausted, to be running out, and I was a single founder. I started with a group of people who were interested by the project, and I thought I will be moving in as co-founder at some point. But as long as it was exploring the project on the, okay, we meet once per week or eventually 2 times and we discuss, etc. They were really supporting it and they were finding the ideas fascinating. But at the times, the maturity of the project was requesting that, all right, now we need everyone to go full-time on board. You'll find, if you have the same experience, you'll find that it's not everyone who's interested exploring the subject with you who's ready to take the risk. At the times, they need to jump into the boat at the risk of losing their employment, their regular revenues, etc. So I find myself quite along that. I had one of the 4 persons who were working with me who decided, yes, I want to do it, but he was kind of a researcher and one of the grant for research he asked from his university 2 years ago was finally and unexpectedly granted to him. At the time we were on finalizing the contract so that he joined in. And as he had a significant amount of money being given to him to fund his research on the other side, he said, okay, no, so sorry, I cannot, I was not expecting. So I cannot. The result of this is to be able to launch, I needed more than 1 person. So I hired a few people on a salary basis to join into the project. So there was one benefit, which was, all right, how you pay for it? It was funded partly by my continuing to empty my pocket and partially by the seed funding of the fund. That's allowed to put teams and to be able to work and accelerate it. Inconvenient of this, as we imagine, is that, well, you have a cash burn. You've been building into the model a cash burn. And then when you're a founder and you have a cash burn, you start by sleeping poorly every night with every month passing, because the question is, all right, that's okay, but in 8 months, how will I continue to pay them if I don't have enough revenue? And then the 8 months become 6 months and 4 months and 2 months. And there you're still really to be on the panic mode, because if you don't raise fund again, but if you're not arrived to the point where you can be cash neutral, that's in some models you can expect to be. But in some models, you have a cash burn which can continue for a while. And the question is, can you raise funds to be able to continue or not? So I got to this point at some point. And, well, scratching my head, visiting, knocking at the door of different VC, etc. An experience that all of you can sympathize with, I suppose. And I thought at some point I will be able to raise funds from AXA Insurance. It's a big insurance group, and I nearly got there. And I had an interest into doing it. We were discussing on a specific amount of investment which was matching to me. And then at some point I had a proposal which finally came. And the proposal which finally came was on very different terms than the one I've discussed, I've negotiated, and the one which would have been acceptable to me. And I just had to say, God, no, sorry guys. If you want to take not 30% of the company, but 70% of it, and give me nothing for it, and continue on the. Sorry, no, that's not even decent. I don't want to continue. So I told him, no, sorry, I cannot. But the issue was after that, all right. Then no, it's not in 2 months. It's in 1 month or at the end of this month that I need to resolve the situations to be able to continue to pay the salary of the guys. And how will I turn this trick out of my hat? Frankly, I had 5% chances of successing at this stage because it was too clever. So I went to my teams, got them run together and tell them, well, guys, I had to answer no to AXA, and I have to find another solution. The time is extremely short, and now in transparency, I want to share it so that you know about it, because it wouldn't be proper. It's already late, and it will not be decent not to tell you at this stage, because I start to think that the balance is negative. And I was extremely lucky, probably, to be able to get a last-minute investor, a Chinese financial company, which maybe a proposal to get 30% of the capital, or 35% of the capital table, with an amount. It was not a great amount, but having an investor who want to offer you a unsatisfactory amount for a minority share is one thing. It's allowed to extend your lifetimes, and you can accept it. While AXA, it was an insignificant amount for a 70% share and taking all the control. And that's what, as a founder, you have a lot of difficulty. I'm not saying that you shall keep the control for 10 years or 15 years of your startup, but at a very early stage, at some point it's just too early. It makes no sense. So I accepted this second offer. And
I think this goes to the second question. I think the second question is, at the one point in time, you sold your company, right? If I got you in the initial stage where you were presenting. Is that correct?
At the end of 2016, I sold the activity, the control of the activity, to an investor, to the same investor who entered for the first 30% initially.
Yeah. Now my question is, what's your advice to us, growing startup and at a certain stage sell them? What's your advice on
that? What's the advice on what? On selling? On
yeah, just growing your startup to a certain state of maturity, then you sell. Is that a good take, or it's not a good, or keeping the company for life, or selling? What's the advice on that?
It's very difficult to, as I said already before. Okay. It's not. There is no lesson. There is a sharing experience, and after that you have to make your own choices. What the idea is, I sold it because. So what you can learn from is the part of the mistake. From mistake, not mistake. I'm not saying I had there's a better option, but I sold it with a deal on which was a two-step deal. A step by selling a 51% control of it, which was an immediate cash sales, which allowed to recover a bit more than my investment. And then there was the tail, and the tail was, all right, the rest of it, the other 49%, how to have them valued a few years later in terms of value of the company when it will have been scaling a lot. So this is kind of fair deal structures. It's happened a lot, and it's happened a lot when you have an investor. The new investor is fully motivated in continuing to build the value of the company. Then I had two elements which have been twisting a bit this, and which prevented me from the sale of the tails of the activity from being the multi-billionaires that you dreamed me of being. Sorry to disappoint, I'm not. Which is that when an investor is taking over a company under this model, you have two ways of doing it. Either you do it, but you stay running the company for a certain, or contractually for a certain number of years. It may be 2 years, 3 years, and you can to develop it. You've secured some investment, and you continue to build it in the way you build it, or you let away the control of company also in terms of management, and then your partners is taking over the management of the company. I agreed to the second options because personally I was also wanting to bring my family back to France, and the boy who came to disrupt me the discussions 5 minutes ago was starting to speak better French and Russian, better Chinese and Russian than French, and I wanted to give him a bit of opportunity to learn French as well. So many reasons. So I went back to France. I kept a seat at the board of the company, but I have a seat of the board and was representing the minority investors. So obviously, it was the majority investor which was making all the decision. And after that, I've not been satisfied about the way the company continued to be developed. Part of it is due to external conditions and pressures of external factors on the investing company, and which distracted it from focusing on developing this model. Part of it may have been links to so no, I cannot mention their name anymore, but I'm not sure of the trustworthiness of the partner and their handling of the post-acquisition deal was they started to hire some of the people which were in the company back into the new parent company, so kind of removing the clauses of the company I had sold, etc., which was generating well, it sounded quite unethical as well. So that's an advice I can say. If you sell it, try to sell it with an agreement that during this number of years, you stay the one running the company, so that you can ensure that the value is created because you have the hands on it, and you cannot be dislodged before this, or else there is an indemnity going with that. That's one recommendation. Yes.
All right, this leads to the third and the last question. I'm going to group them together in order to give other speakers an opportunity to talk. Okay, we're talking about the models. Yeah, I want to ask, I wish to know if your models were actually developed by yourself, or at some point in time you copycat, like you got ideas from other people's model and modify them to suit your business model. And lastly, which are the most preferred cultural values you actually use to manage your team? I think that's the end of my questions.
Okay. Maybe I'll let the first questions aside, because I'm sure you'll find a lot of literatures, and I'll try to answer to the third, and maybe give a chance to another person on the floor to raise the questions. So the third question was, sorry, can you repeat, please, Newton, the third questions?
The third question, yeah, like, did you actually at any point in time copycat?
Yes.
Like
the model, right? So the model, the actual model about it was built by me. The product model were built by me, and the product was very innovative. In terms of the logic of risk sharing, first thing I shall say is that this model was invented 700 years ago or 800 years ago by merchants in merchant city in Italy, who were having boats full of goods traveling around the world, and which realized that when one of them had their boat going under, being sunk, they were losing not only the boat, but all the goods that they had paid for, and they were bankrupt. So at some point, they told themselves, all right, it's maybe more clever to get together the 30 or 40 biggest merchants in the city to be able to share this risk together and get into an agreement where if one has a boat sinking, all the other one contributes to pay something. So some extent, the model already existed for long. And in a way, if you think about what the Loaec is doing on a B2B basis, the syndicate of the Loaec to cover the risk, you also have an element of coming together in a group of mutual risk takers who are sharing the risk as well. Not exactly the same model, but the concept of insurance, in a way, are very old. So it's a way of how you put them, how you organize it, and how you organize your answer to this, and how you optimize it. So I was 800 too late to some things of invent the model, and we all know that in Africa there is also a different form of tontine for joint investments, but also joint covering of a risk linked to someone deceasing in the village and all the village or cotizations to that. So there is. I don't want to claim that I was the first one and the only one in the world to have thought about this. I'm convinced that the value of what you launch is not the fact that you've been the only one to think about one model. When you have one model being created, it's very often because the ecosystem reached the maturity which allow for this idea, for this model to be possible. So some will think faster, some more slowly, but if you think around the world, it will be very surprising that you don't have someone else in another place in the world not coming up with the same idea, except if the specific ecosystem needed exists only in the country where you are. But very likely other people think about it. So I'm not thinking in terms of intellectual properties on the models, nor if I'm the one. What you need when you're doing this is you need to be able to develop the model well and fast. A lot of it is matter of executions and agility and speed. And that's what makes really the difference. Of course, you can be innovative, you can be creative. That's all very satisfactory to one's ego. But the reality is, well, if someone has the ideas 1 week after you, but he's more agile and execute faster, you'll have the idea first, but he will be winning 10 times. All right. So sorry, Newton, for not taking the last questions, but I'm sure you'll find literature about that, and maybe we need to give a chance to someone else on the floor. And that was the initial question of Emma that I didn't answer yet, Nathan.
Yes, sure.
So who's on the floor asking questions? Thanks, Newton, for you. Is there?
Nana, do you want to ask your question and then we can respond to John Paul's?
Yes. So yeah, I've got a number of questions, but then considering time and I'll probably consolidate them and then try and reduce them. So my first question is, do you consider any age sort of too old to, start a business or be an entrepreneur? And does that sort of impact you negatively or positively to attract partnerships and investment and funding? Okay, so this is an easy answer, and the answer is no. Next question. All right, let me elaborate a bit more. No. The first thing is that you can have an objective statistical approach to it, and if you look at the curve of the age of people creating startups in general, and at the speed at which those startups are growing, or at the number of those startups which are failing, depending on the age, you see first that the two curves are generally quite close to each other. But the second element is still that you tend to have the curve of success, or the curve or speed of growth is a little bit higher in the range of let's say 35 to 55, or then in the range of 20 to 35. So that's okay. I'm not covering the 80 years old startup entrepreneur. I'm not old enough to have an opinion on this, but the statistics shows that you don't need to be young, you don't need to be, and you can succeed
at every age, but there is no reasons allowing to say that an entrepreneur who is 40 or 50 has less chances. The statistics will rather say that there is what can be understood in terms of experience, network, etc., that you have a bit more chances of succeeding. But this is very small, right? So it's not a justification not to start younger. In fact, when you speak about with investors, you find that the only thing they agree to VC investors in terms of what is a strong determinant of success or failures is how many times you have already launched a startup before. And you have the question of how many times did you launch and succeed launching a startup before, or how many times did you launch and fail launching a startup before. But what is interesting is that the chances of success increase no matter whether you've succeeded or failed. They probably increase a bit more if you succeeded, but even if you launch a startup and fail, a repeat startup founder who did not succeed one time, two times, he's still building experience and increasing his chances of being successful. And even the VC who are not, they are called capital risk, but they don't like to take risk, right? But they still consider it being the only valid elements and not the age curve to think as a founder as being more successful. The fact, however, in favor of starting young, you have two facts. The first one is you have less family charge, less financial charge. So failing could be a bit less consequential for you when you are 25 than when you are 45 with a family to support. So that's the first reason for people who are 25 to people who are generally young to be launching startup is that they can at less risk, because failure is not having the same scale of impact on other people in some context. It may be different if you're supporting your own family and your own parents, but generally it's still true. That's the first element to recommend young people to do it. And the second element is, well, even if you fail, it will give more chance the next time. So please go and do it. Does it answer your question, Nana?
It does, yeah, very insightful. Like I said, I'll reduce my question. I'll ask the last one. So how do you deal, I mean, being an entrepreneur could be a very lonely road. And you talked about, you started with a group and then when it came to the crunch, everyone sort of disappears. So how do you deal with companies when you've got a product, you don't have buckets, but you have got something to show and, you know, you funded it yourself, but being just yourself, how do you convince companies to deal with you? Because, you know, in my experience, you've had companies who say, well, it's only you. We don't know anybody else. What if he disappears? We give you the money and he disappears. How do you go about, you know, putting structures or sort of dealing with companies when you are just a single person, a single founder who has built something to deliver benefit to a company?
That's tough, and that's even tougher if you've not launched successfully 2 other companies before. One thing is that very often accelerators. So I don't know what's the practice in InnoLab, but I saw a lot of accelerators who don't even want to accept in the accelerator people who are single founder, because there is kind of prejudice, and the prejudice goes when they focalize it into, well, if you're not even able to convince a second person to be with you on this board, how could you expect that as a founder of a startup, which work is to pitch and convince clients, convince investors behind to be able to do it, right? It's not sure that you'll be able to do it. So a lot of accelerators will be facing you back with this stern answer is, okay, find someone because that's the minimum standard we accept to be able to do it. On the other side, I'm not a 100% propagator of these ideas. Only you need to be several to launch a startup. I think it's still a benefit to be able to be several of you, but there is one strength into being a single founder, is that when you have 3 founders, they can start to disagree and to fight at any time, to the point of where they sink a publishing company, but a lot of other cases as well. And that's also a classical reason for project to stop, is one of the co-founders don't have the motivation or continue to make the effort more, and the contribution is unbalanced between the two. When you're single, you have one strength, is as long as you don't give up, the project is not dead. Nothing can lead you, nothing can force you to stop the project until such time that you accept that you give up on the idea. So at some point, I'll also found it a significant strength into it. So and I think that on this, I've not answered directly to your question, which was maybe more asking for more practical answer to that. But that's what I feel is the balance between the two. And the truth is, okay, you can be alone, but either you need to have a co-founding team, or you need to have clients to show that there's relativity between it. You can be a single founder, and if you are able to generate tractions and prove you're able to recruit clients, then then you'll find other clients. But if you're speaking about B2C, you have B2C clients, you can convince investors or B2B partners to move into it. The issue is that if you're doing B2B, you need at some point to find the first client, and then that's I agree, a challenge. Sorry, I don't have the magical wand, but that's the insight or the experience I can share with you.
All right, okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you. Emma, I think it's 8, so I can still answer your questions, but maybe everyone has other issues, or maybe you'll have to invite me for another conference and another times to have the answer to to your first question.
Well, we can't wait to ask you back. John Paul asked a question that honestly, I kind of want to know if you have just a little answer to. He just named, you sold insurance to 300 million people.
The peer-to-peer model sold insurance to 300 million people. I've been selling insurance to 50,000 people, and then I sold the company.
I mean, it's still both of those are staggering numbers. And so, yeah, I guess just, is there any additional guidance in your last few words before you let us go of your ability to reach the level of impact you've reached in your career? I think is partially why I love listening to you talk. And it's just, and maybe it's your ability to understand your customer so deeply, to know what's going to work. But I just love to know, are there any sort of parting words as we think about strategy to increase impact and penetration of insurance? Is there something in particular that guides how you think about the model that's worked best for you?
Okay. An easy one is find the ecosystems in which you can plug in, so that these ecosystems give you privileged access to all the existing members of the ecosystem. And I think that this is making a tremendous difference. That's That's one of the reason of this scaling to 300 million was that there were huge ecosystem in China, both on the Alibaba side and on the WeChat Pay side. Some other actors succeeded into building 3 million to 10 million, 12 million users with this model in the market. But that's the difference between 3 to 10 million and 100 million for the two biggest actors. The difference was in the ecosystem.
Yeah. You know, I would say one of our very first companies in the first program for InnoLab focused on insurance through chamas. So may or may not relate to those of you who aren't in Kenya specifically, but basically they're communities that come together and save. And it's an ecosystem of, I don't even know the actual numbers here in Kenya, but every woman I know is in a chama. And I think that's such a great piece of advice, right? Is to think about where are the financial ecosystems that particularly are not potentially connected to banks or traditional finance. And they exist in many different forms. And your ability to tap into that ecosystem. Motorshare tapped into Boda drivers, you know, who use cards to get deals on gas, and they use that system to support the ability to insure motorcycle drivers. So I do think that that level of deeply understanding your customer and your market is hugely important. And Tang, I have taken you 6 minutes past our time, and I'm pretty sure this group could keep you here for another hour. Sadly, it is past my bedtime here in Nairobi, but it has been such a pleasure. It always is. I'm going to volunteer on your behalf that if members of the cohort have more questions, Tang, before, you've been incredibly generous in making those connections. So I hope that you'll let me connect if anyone reaches out to me to learn more from you. But as I shared, one lucky member of the cohort is going to get to work directly with Tang throughout this entire journey. And I hope that this is just a small insight into the type of mentors who'll support you during this time. Tang, you bring such a wealth of insight experience. I will send you my address. I really want to read your book. And we're just so grateful to have you joining us again, and clearly just to see the desire from this community to learn more from you. So we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us this evening.
Thanks a lot, Emma. Thanks to all of you for spending this time with me. I've said, Emma, don't hesitate to contact her if you want my emails to contact me. You can also very easily check on LinkedIn. You'll probably find me there as well. And everyone from the audience, everyone from this accelerator is welcome to come. Don't hesitate not only to follow, but if you want to go to connect, and just mention to me that you're coming from the InnoLab accelerator. I'm sorry I didn't catch all your name of all of you in the sequence already, but just mention it in the comment, and I'll be very happy to accept you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I am so thrilled to have kicked off InnoLab with Tang. Thank you for always making such a memorable start to this program and reminding us all that half of this is about the journey. Whatever your journey is, right? Whether it takes you to different countries, or you take a pit stop to write a book or two, the journey is what matters. And hopefully part of this experience together is our ability to share our own journeys and to learn from one another. And so we thank you so much for just setting that stage for all of us.
It's truly my pleasure. Have a great success, all of you, and talk to you over time.
Thank you, and see you on demo day. Bye. Bye, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your night.
Bye. Thank you.